and welcome to the At Peace Parents podcast. I'm Casey, and I'm here to empower you in your decision-making as a parent of a demand-avoidant child. My goal is to share insights that will generate aha moments and support your connection with your child. I'm a mom of two amazing little boys, one of whom is PDA, and I've worked with hundreds of parents just like you to teach them how to lead their child out of burnout and find the clarity, peace, and sense of community they need. Hey guys, real quick. From Monday, March 9th until Friday, March 20th, we will be running a special Try Before You Buy promotion for our Paradigm Shift program. For just $49, you can get a month of access to our entire pre-recorded video curriculum and evidence-based methodology, a searchable archive of almost 500 private podcast episodes, and dozens of PDFs you can share. When your month of access is up, you can opt out, no questions asked, or continue with us for the live cohort and coaching in May. If you stay with us, the $49 will be credited towards the full price of the program. Happy almost spring, and I hope you will join. Now, without further ado, let's get to the podcast episode. Hello and welcome everyone to part 3 about hygiene and pathological demand avoidance, or pervasive drive for autonomy. So today we're going to talk about everything regarding hygiene that isn't teeth brushing and the dentist, because I recorded a separate episode for that topic. And today we're really going to focus on practical tips for the following: bathing and showering, hair washing, hair brushing, nail clipping, hand washing, and getting dressed. So these are the categories that you guys wrote in about on Instagram. And I'm going to do a couple things for you today to make sure that this enters into your brain and helps you take action in a way that feels logical and practical. Okay, first I'm going to go through briefly some questions that were submitted so that you can recognize whether or not this topic is resonant for you and your neurodivergent child, whether or not they have a PDA or autism diagnosis. Then we're going to briefly go through the logic of why your pathologically demand avoidant child or teen is having trouble accessing this basic need. Then we're going to talk about prioritization and deconditioning a little bit around the shoulds regarding our children's hygiene, which is challenging and I've been through myself. And then we're going to go through practical tips using the accommodations of lowering demands with examples, autonomy as an accommodation, equality as an accommodation, and then novelty and nervous system safety. So I hope that this will be supportive of you. Now, I want to make sure that if you haven't listened to part 1, which goes more through the logic of why and helps you recognize whether or not your child is in burnout and whether or not hygiene is their stickiest basic need, I would recommend that you go back and listen to that. But if you're just here for the practical tips, that's fine too. All right, let's start with some of your questions to orient us. So we had 15 questions that were focused on bathing, showering, and hair washing, and then just a couple in the other categories. So some examples. I need more info around showering refusal. I have an age 13 boy. Another one in this category is, why hasn't my PDA 12-year-old son taken a shower or bath in 9 months? The next one is, kids are resistant to brushing and showering, but we insist. Some days they don't. Next one, how to make showering not a demand. Hair is matted after a month. The next one, refuses to get in the shower, but once in there, refuses to get out. Hair brushing, hair tangles that get intense. Judgy family, thinks girls' hair should be neat. The next one, struggling with filthy hair. Suggestions, please. Next one, my struggle is getting my child dressed. She just will not do it. Do accommodated PDA adults still have trouble with hygiene? Does it last forever? Etc. Okay, Great. So these are some of the questions that people submitted. So just take a minute and think like, oh yeah, this is relevant to me, or nope, not relevant. Okay, let's go quickly through the logic. And it's important to understand this because if you use the practical tips that I'm going to give you as a way of modifying behavior for your PDA child, they're going to perceive threat around that, and it's actually going to make them control more and exert more control around the things they're having trouble doing. So we just want to be careful of how our energy is, because and this is why I emphasize the logic, because if we can be aware of the deep why they're having so much trouble doing this, we can address it as a root cause. Okay, so yes, PDA children are neurodivergent. They often have sensory issues. They're often anxious. They have lots of reasons why they might avoid bathing, showering, hair washing, hair brushing. That would make sense through those lenses of like, it doesn't feel good to get in the shower. I don't like the way the water feels. I don't like the sound of the water coming out of the faucet. Like, for example, with my younger PDA son, I have to shut both his door and the bathroom door while we're running the bath because it bothers his auditory input. But for the purpose of this podcast episode, we're going to talk about a different logic than sensory or anxiety or not understanding communication around hygiene as a basic need, and really think about the deep why of the PDA lens. Okay, so for most PDAers, if you tell them to do something, they're going to fixate on doing the opposite or not doing the thing. Why is that? Because every time their subconscious survival brain, or the amygdala, the part of the brain that subconsciously detects threat, every time they perceive that they don't have autonomy, freedom, and choice around something like bathing, showering, hair washing, nail clipping, they're going to perceive threat, and their nervous system is going to immediately and automatically go into a fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or shutdown response. And what's unique about PDA is there's another causal link there, which is their brain perceiving that you're above them as the decider, as the authority. They feel below you. You're the one deciding on bath. You're telling them to wash their hair. And then they have that same nervous system reaction, and then they're going to equalize, which is they perceive they're below, they try and be above by exerting control over what you're trying to get them to do. Okay, so that's the logic in the moment that you're trying to encourage, pressure, expect, incentivize them to do the thing. But what is even more relevant, I think, for many of the people who submitted questions, and if this is really a podcast episode that you're like, oh my gosh, I have to listen to that one, it's likely that the control around hygiene is also a result not just of what's going on in the moment, but of cumulative nervous system activation in their system that has happened over the course of weeks, months, and even years. So part of how I define PDA is a survival drive for autonomy and equality that consistently overrides other survival instincts like eating, sleeping, hygiene, toileting, and or safety, either in the moment, like we just talked about, or in accumulation. So let's imagine that you have a tween, a 12-year-old who has never really loved taking baths or brushing their hair, but like has done it, right? Maybe it's not as frequent as their other siblings or their peers, but it hasn't been like they haven't taken a bath for 6 months, right? But over time, as their subconscious brain continually perceives threats to autonomy and equality, whether it's at school, at home, in therapy, during sports, and even things that they like, it's going to be building in the system or in their body towards what I call the threshold of tolerance in the nervous system. And once they pass that, even if all those threats to autonomy and equality had nothing to do with bathing and showering, they were building up, and when they cross that threshold, control starts to coalesce around one or more basic needs. Because if you think about it, what's sort of the last line of defense of control that you have as a human, right? It's your own bodily autonomy. You can't force someone to eat. Maybe you could put in a feeding tube, but like, you can't sit there and make a child eat. You can't make a child sleep, right? I mean, you could give them a bunch of melatonin and stuff, but even that is going to be perceived as a loss of autonomy, and the nervous system activates and overrides that other survival instinct of like, I'm so tired, I have to sleep, right? And so hygiene is another one of those, especially if you have a child who is getting bigger than you and stronger, right? Where they will flop on the way to the bath and you would have to carry and restrain them, and they're trying to run out of the bath and screaming and hitting you. Like, it isn't that easy to force, like truly force another human to engage in their basic needs. And so when they reach a certain point in their losses of autonomy and equality, subconsciously, they will be exerting control around what they can. And for some, this will be hygiene primarily, okay? So if we can think about this not through a behavioral lens of like, it's goal-oriented behavior and they're manipulative and I need to teach them the skills to bathe, versus there's this subconscious drive in their nervous system because of all of this stress. And so when they hit a certain point, you have this level of control and avoidance. And so if we really want to support them to access hygiene, we have to lower that cumulative nervous system stress through consistent accommodations, not just in the moment of bathing and showering, but in all moments of their lives to the extent that it's safe and feasible within your constraints. Okay, so that's the logic. So the more we can lower their overall nervous system stress, the less control you're going to see coalescing around hygiene, for example. But in the meantime, while we're increasing autonomy, equality, nervous system safety, lowering demands for our kids, viewing them through a different lens, how do we manage in this situation where like a kid won't wash their hands and they've just gone to the bathroom, or they want to have friends over, but they smell because they won't wear deodorant, or they won't, wash their hair, or maybe a sibling is turned off by it, or maybe your sensory input is overwhelmed by having to sit near a smelly child, teen, or tween. So before we dive into like what to do operationally, I want to talk briefly about prioritization. And this is why I separated out teeth brushing and going to the dentist from the rest of these, because I think that teeth brushing is more closely related to like, you have to do this to be well and not get sick than other things like clipping your nails. Okay. And so we want to start prioritizing which basic needs actually matter and which ones we're just conditioned to be worried about because other people will judge us, or because we're worried about other people judging our kids, or because we have constraints like, if your child doesn't get dressed, they can't attend the karate class that they really want to go to. Okay, so first I want to encourage you to take a step back and remember that not all hygiene is created equal in terms of how it relates to the safety, well-being, and health of your child. Okay, and I want to decondition us a little bit and explore, because this really helps me. This has helped me a lot through some of my toughest moments, especially with hygiene, with my second son, who's PDA, autistic, and 7, and currently recovering from burnout. 2 things I would remember. One is that throughout human history until recently, and even now in many parts of the world, lots of people lived their entire lives without running water, antibacterial soaps, paper towels, toilet paper, a lot of the things that we take for granted related to like must-haves, okay? And luckily, now we have antibiotics and we have more medical care than we did before. But I just want to like remind us that, people did not bathe every single day with soap and with shampoo and conditioner and have paper towels and wash their hands 10 times a day and, change their clothes every single day and then change into pajamas and clip their nails and brush their hair the way that we do now in modern society. And yes, a lot of this is hygienic practices that have emerged because it relates to health, and some of them are not. They're just societal norms, right? And I know this because I've lived in 7 different countries. I've worked in areas that are underdeveloped, that are conflict and post-conflict zones in South America, and I've worked in rural areas. Okay, so I want to tell you a story about one of these anecdotes. I'll tell you an anecdote, real life anecdote, and I'm going to tell you it because I think about it often with my younger son as I go through this. Okay, so between my first and second year at Columbia University in New York City, I was studying economic and political development in Latin America before I did my PhD in Wisconsin. Yes, I've done a lot of school. It's my coping mechanism. Bear with me. Between the first and second year of my master's degree, we had to do a practical internship or fellowship. And I did a fellowship with a microfinance organization that worked in Mexico and Ecuador. And I was a survey enumerator where I would go with the loan distributor who would give money to women in rural and impoverished areas in these countries and support them in creating their own businesses, whether this was a farm business, a childcare business, whatever it was. They would get loans, and then the loan officer would check in on them and make sure that they were doing okay with their business. So as a survey enumerator, they randomized the places that we had to travel to in Mexico and Ecuador. So we were on buses going throughout these urban and rural areas. And when I was in Mexico, so I rode to this rural area and I would interview the women and ask how many people were in your household, how many pots and pans do you have as a proxy for their socioeconomic status, all in Spanish. And we were, gathering data for the organization that we worked for. And I remember often I'd be interviewing women who were breastfeeding while they were talking to me. They were caring for kids while they were talking to me. Something I also reflect back on because they had to do it all, right? Like many of us as moms of PDA kids. And we were in a rural area and there was this tiled building that didn't have walls, but it did have a roof because it was a warm climate. And the kids were just running free and they were dirty. Their hair hadn't been washed. They were very happy. They were playing together. And there was this one little kid who had a sucker and he was running. And I was like, ooh, that's not safe. But, I wasn't a mom at the time and I was there to listen. And the kid stopped, took out his little penis, peed on the tile, and then just kept running around, okay? And then as I'm interviewing this mom who is breastfeeding, he runs past, slips in his own urine, drops himself into the urine and the sucker into the urine, gets up, puts it back in his mouth, and he's off to the races and running back to play, okay? The mom does not bat an eye. And part of this is because she's trying to do the survey enumeration with me and obviously power dynamics. I'm a white woman. She's trying to do what's asked of her, blah. But as I'm leaving, we get on the back of the truck, I'm with the loan officer from the microfinance organization. We're speaking in Spanish. And I was like, yeah, that was an interesting experience. And we were kind of laughing about what happened. And she goes, I travel to urban areas and rural areas all the time and meet with families. And the children who live on farms never get sick. They're the healthiest and the most robust of all the families that I visit. And it was such a different perspective, right? Because I had grown up in the United States and I just think back to that moment of it's okay. Like, it's okay if my kid has the same clothes on for a couple days and their nails aren't clipped. Like, they're gonna be fine, you know? And I get it. I've been very worried about my kids, but I just want to like mention this because if that anecdote helps you, it has helped me to decondition a little bit about like, if this doesn't happen, my kid's gonna die, you know? So let's get into it. Now, this is where we do the prioritization, an invitation to think differently. Now, hand washing, if your child is immunocompromised, if they're having trouble with toileting, yes, they're going to need to wash their hands more. However, if they're just playing in the mud or like playing at some other kid's house and they come home and they're like resisting washing their hands, is it worth the cost of activation because they have like mud on their hands? Only you can answer that, but like I'm inviting you to think about it a little bit differently, not just this knee-jerk, they have to wash their hands no matter what, and I'm going to force them, even if it results in like a huge activation and a rupture in connection. And I've had to make these decisions. Like I remember during the pandemic, having knockdown, drag out fights with my older PDA son and trying to physically force him to wash his hands, and it was a disaster. But it was coming from a place of like, I'm trying to keep you safe. But these are the moments that led me to realize like this is a cost-benefit decision and it isn't a costless transaction because it's not just in the moment, it builds in the system. Okay, now bathing and showering. Yes, if they're having trouble with toileting, you know, if they haven't done it in months and months and they have sores or they have things that like really are health related, obviously we want to facilitate bathing and showering. However, can we explore the idea that like you don't have to bathe every single day? And like I'm saying that because I used to feel like such a bad mom when I like let go this like every single day we bathe and wash our hair and like do this routine because I was associating it with being a good parent rather than the necessity of actually doing it, right? And for you, this might look like every other day. It could look like once a week. It could look like once every 2 weeks. It's all okay. And it's often temporary, especially if this isn't their stickiest basic need. But if we double down on it with a PDA kit, it can become stickier, right? So we're just exploring prioritization and relaxing some of our conditioning around what has to happen. Hair washing, again, are we putting a lot of pressure on ourselves and them to wash the hair because it has to happen for their safety and health? Or is it because it's making you uncomfortable what other people will think? And I'm not trying to discount judgment, but like we have to make these cost-benefit decisions when often we're choosing between someone else's preference or approval of us and what our child actually needs to stay connected to us and keep their nervous system from going further into burnout. Same thing, getting dressed. Do they need to get dressed? Do they have to go to school and get dressed? That's one thing. But if they're home on the weekend, like, can they be naked? Can they not have a shirt on? Like, can we explore some of these more flexible ideas? Okay, same thing with cutting hair. Like my younger son, William, he's been in burnout since June of 2025, and right now it's February of 2026. He did not cut his hair from June 2025 until January 7th. Why do I know that date? Because it was only on his brother's 11th birthday during our family celebration that he suddenly decided he was ready to get his hair cut. And we basically like dropped everything we were doing, got out my husband's barber kit and started cutting his hair in the middle of the birthday party. So did it bother me that his hair was constantly in his face, dirty, looked like a ragamuffin? Of course it did. But I knew that forcing him, because hygiene was more of a sticky basic need for him, I knew it would make it worse over the long term. Okay, so let's get into some practical tips of how to facilitate access to these basic needs. Remembering that if we use these as a I'm going to do this, and then in the moment they're going to do it, that's a behavioral approach and it won't work. So we want this, think about it like this. I'm going to experiment for a consistent period of time, maybe a month, maybe 2 weeks, doing this every time and then observing if and when things start to shift. Okay, so this is the difference between I lowered the demand by brushing their hair for them today, why aren't they brushing their hair tomorrow? Or I gave them autonomy around bathing and now they haven't bathed for 2 weeks. It's not working. Okay, this is a shift in paradigm in lowering the nervous system stress around these things so that they can access them consistently over the longer term, and modeling for them some of the ways that they can manage their nervous system disability, even if it's fluctuating. Okay, so let's first talk about lowered demands. So what does it mean to lower demand? I'm going to define this for you because I think lowering demands often gets conflated with the concepts of autonomy and equality. And that makes sense because, we use the term pathological demand avoidance, but I think it's necessary to separate them so you understand how to get creative about using these tactics. Okay, so lowering demands means doing things for your child or teen that they can cognitively and physically do for themselves at other moments or that they have done. So let me give you some examples. Let's talk about bathing, right? And this can be applied, a lot of my examples are from younger kids, but you can apply them to any age. You just might need to add details into your own life. Right? So when I'm talking about an example, it's not only for younger kids. So bathing. Let's say you have a child who doesn't want to bathe or 11-year-old, because we're expecting them to go into the bathroom, turn on the faucet or the shower, adjust to get it hot or cold to how they like it, go get the towel, do all the things in the shower, use the soap, use the shampoo, get out, towel themselves off, turn off the water, and then pick up their clothing and put it in, the laundry basket. So with a younger child, we would often be happy to do things like get the towel, turn on the, hot water and adjust it for them, pick up their clothes that they left on the bathroom floor because they're still, quote, learning and it's developmentally appropriate. But if you have a teenager who's PDA, you might need to do the lowered demands around everything but the washing, right? And I do this for my 11-year-old, and it's only now in very granular increments that it's okay, now he's able to get his own towel, but I still need to turn on the water for him and adjust it. Okay, now he knows how to turn on the water and has enough nervous system capacity to do that, but he still needs me to turn it off. Okay, now he can do all of that, but he still leaves his clothes on the floor. So it's yes, he can do all of that cognitively and physically, but in order to facilitate him accessing the shower consistently, we have for years done all of these lowered demands to just have him focus on getting his body wet and putting some shampoo and soap on his body. And that's it. We lowered all the other demands. And so that's a mindset shift for a teen, for example. For a younger child, it might be, you actually need to do the bathing. You need to do all of the, using the soap and doing their hair and getting a cup to rinse their hair and making sure nothing gets in their eyes, even if you think they're too old for that, right? Or if this is a stickiest basic need, you might need to use wet wipes or deodorant wipes because they're refusing to get in the bath or the shower. We have had to use deodorant wipes, for example, with one of my sons because his feet smelled and he was going to occupational therapy. So we would have to wipe his feet so that it was like not smelly for the occupational therapist or the other children, right? And this was at a time when he wasn't bathing every single day. So we want to get creative about how we can do this. And what we did was like, I'm going to wash my feet too. This is a protocol that like we all have clean feet because we're barefoot and we're playing together in the sensory gym, right? So I would do my feet. The therapist would do her feet. We would do his feet. It was no big deal. You can do sponge baths, right? They don't necessarily have to be in the bath or the shower. We can also lower the demand of hair washing, right? We can do that for them regardless of age, or we can separate it out and put hair washing in a different category than just bathing, right? We don't have to do it all the time. We can wash their hands for them, right? So if you have a child or a teen who's resisting hand washing, but you know that hand washing needs to happen, you can do a lot of things. You can, they can be on their iPad and you can bring them a bowl with soapy warm water and just have them soak their hands and then put a washcloth out to let them dry it. I've done that hundreds of times. Okay, is it my preference? Absolutely not. Is it annoying? Absolutely. Do I do it? Yes. Because I'm trying to help my child in this moment of such high nervous system stress that they're operating from their survival brain, trying to help them access hygiene. You can also use a washcloth, a wet paper towel, wet wipes to wash their hands. You can use antibacterial gel. My younger son hates that because he still sucks his thumb and it makes the smell and taste too overwhelming for him. But these are just ideas for ways that we can lower the demand by helping them do it like we're doing it for them. Clipping nails, right? If you have a teen, you could offer to do a spa day and like you're going to massage their feet and you're going to clip their nails or not. You're just going to like clean their feet. Some parents do this while their young child is sleeping. A lot of parents of PDAers do that. Getting dressed, I know this is like a power struggle for a lot of parents and it's frustrating because you're like, dude, you're 10. Can't you dress yourself? Like, why do I have to like go get your socks and your underwear and your t-shirt and your shorts and physically put it on for you and then tie your shoes? That is a lowered demand. And for a couple years, while my older son was, in his first foray into being consistently in school, even though he could cognitively and physically do it himself, I was getting his clothes on for him as a lowered demand, right? And now he physically dresses himself most of the time, but often he'll be like, I need pants or I need socks. And about half the time, I'm still running up the stairs and grabbing them for him, even if he can do it himself. Why? Because it's not worth the cost of his nervous system getting activated, because what I really want him to access is joy, education, and being at school, because he wants to be there. Right? So that's an example of what I mean by lowering demands. And again, this means confronting our assumptions about like, I'm enabling them, they're never going to learn. If I do this, they'll never be independent. Because it's not the tactics that you're getting stuck on. Like any of you can be like, yeah, I can go, if you're not disabled yourself or chronically ill, like most of us can walk up the stairs and get our kids socks. We just don't want to. And part of why we don't want to is because we're scared. We're scared of the future. So if we can just stay radically present in the moment and experiment with these tips and then see what shifts. Okay, next, autonomy. So this is the type of accommodation that often gets conflated with lowering demands and also misconstrued as you just let them do whatever they want. We're going to break it down into 5 things so you can see how we can differentiate between different types of autonomy that we can mindfully support them with. So we can give our kids autonomy around where they do a basic need or hygiene, when they do it, how they do it, what they do it with, and then finally the last one, if they do it at all. Okay, so let's talk about bathing. And we're going to go through the where, when, how, what, and if with examples. So how do we think about bathing? We think it has to happen in a tub, naked, or in the shower, right? But what if we could explore autonomy around where a child does it? Could they do it in a lake? Could they do it in a hot tub? Could it be swimming in the summer if they're younger? Could it be like in the sink for fun? Could it be using a hose outside if it's warm out? We can reconceptualize this and get away from our perfectionism by providing them some where autonomy. When? Most of us have our conditioned ideas around, okay, we always take baths when we're little, right before bed, at least here in the United States. And then as you get older, you take showers in the morning before you go to school, right? But what if we could be more flexible with that and let them choose what time of day or even the days of the week that they do it? Maybe if your kid's home on the weekend, it can be in the middle of the day. It can be when the need strikes organically. It can be only on the weekends because that's when the nervous system stress and demands are lower because they're in school the rest of the week. These are just ideas to experiment with autonomy. Now, how they bathe, we can give them autonomy around how they bathe. They can use wet wipes. They can use a wet towel that you put soap on. They can stick just one part of their body into the bath or shower stream or faucet. They can stand up in the tub and you can use the water and a washcloth if they don't like the sensory experience or if they want to exert control over that, right? So there's no rules. There's no rules. There's just norms. What can they bathe with? They can bathe with soap. They can bathe with shampoo. They can bathe with bath bombs. They can get foam soap, shaving cream. Maybe we're just starting with clean water and that's enough. Clean warm water to start, right? And after we've introduced all of these choice points of where we can provide them autonomy and they're still struggling, they're in burnout or if it's the stickiest basic need, that's when we explore the if more. Okay, so you're the one who has to determine where your child or teen is at in terms of how you want to experiment with these accommodations. And why are we focused on autonomy? Because it is the root cause of what activates their nervous system. So if we're trying to lower the cumulative nervous system stress that has gotten us to this point, and if we're trying to not rupture connection, we want to go right to the root cause, which is perceived losses of autonomy and feeling below you, which is lack of equality, and address that, which is what we're doing, okay? Because if we just lump bathing into a singular category of demands, it's a demand, a standalone demand, then there's nothing we can work with because it's like, well, my kid has pathological demand avoidance. This is a demand. It's not going to happen. We're in the business of problem solving, experimentation, and observation. Okay, next, washing hair. How could we give autonomy around washing hair? Let's think about where. Could we do it in the sink? Could we be humorous and do it in a bowl in the kitchen and get soap and water everywhere and be like, oh my gosh, we're breaking the rules? Could we have them lean over, not wash the rest of their body, but just put their head over and pretend like we're at a salon? Could we go to a salon and have them wash the hair? That's also a possibility. So again, no rules. When are they washing hair? So I think giving flexibility and decoupling bathing and showering with, you must also wash your hair every time, can also introduce less stress for us as parents and less perceived being controlled for them. Okay, because we get attached to the times of like, you have to wash your hair before a social event or a family gathering or when you have an event. But the more we get attached to like, you have to wash your hair because you have this theater performance at school or a date, the less they're going to be able to access doing the thing. Okay, and I know that's hard to hear, but like that's how it works. That's how PDA works. So to the extent we can, let them decide when they wash their hair, the cadence and rhythm of what they need, right? So one of the things we do with my younger son is we often run the entire bath and have the like offering and sensory cues of like, it's a bath. And he'll reject it and then say, I'll do it tomorrow, right? And then we'll have more success the next day because we're allowing him the autonomy around when, right? But if I'm doubling down and forcing him, he might not bathe for a month, right? So we have to address our own fear about letting go of control in these moments because we fear if he doesn't do it tonight, he's never going to do it. And yes, if they're in burnout, you might see some of that pattern that plays out, not just like today versus tomorrow, but like today versus 4 months from now. And that's really hard. I get it. Okay. How? How do you wash your hair? Could it be with a faucet, with a bowl, with a hose? We talked about separating the shower or bathing experience, using dry shampoo, just exploring different ways of doing things. Okay, let's move on to brushing hair. And I'm moving quickly because there are so many different categories of hygiene. You know, again, when we want them to brush their hair before a social event or before someone comes over to our house. But maybe they only like doing it after they shower, which is once every 2 weeks. Or maybe they only want to do it when they decide. And that can be hard. And I know it gets tangled. But again, thinking about trade-offs. Okay, so how can we explore more autonomy around how? Maybe it's partial, maybe it's just their bangs, or maybe it's just a piece of their hair. That's okay. Can we give autonomy around what they comb or brush with? We could do a comb, we could do a brush, we could do their fingers and hands, whatever they want to do it. We're not trying to be perfect here. And then there's if. And again, like I often think about friends of mine who have had dreadlocks. Right? I lived for a year in Spain and my best friend had dreadlocks and like she hadn't brushed her hair in like years and she was gorgeous and like who cares? I don't know. I think about these things either historically or geographically, contextually, because it reminds me that there isn't just one way to do this and be fine. And like, it's okay. It didn't ruin her life that she had dreadlocks. In fact, I think it helped us make more friends in Europe because they were like, ooh, these aren't typical Americans. At least she wasn't, and I was trailing along with her, looking more typical. Okay, clipping nails. Where? Can you do it while they're in bed? Can you do it in the car? Even though you don't want nail clippings around, who cares? Pick them up afterwards. Seize the moment. They might need to do it on their iPad. While they're on their iPad, just giving them autonomy around where they're clipping their nails, even if it's annoying to you. When, I know as parents, like it soothes our nervous system to be like, okay, on Saturday mornings, we clip nails. Everybody does it this day. And because that routine and sense of control can be regulating and you can depend on it. But if we can relax that a little bit and give them autonomy around like, when they do it, once a month. Can they do it after bath? Can you strew the nail clipper and see if they do it themselves? I mean, that's what ended up happening with my older son because he did not want me doing it. And so eventually he just started doing it himself so that I wouldn't do it. Okay, the how, nail scissors, nail clippers. Some of these kids peel their nails and it cuts them by default. I'm not saying it's ideal, but like, again, autonomy. Giving them autonomy around what you do. So, often with my younger PDA son who's 7, we've gone a lot of time without clipping toenails especially. And over the Christmas holiday, he like jumped in a pool and it broke his big toenail. And it was like a memory of a natural consequence in his head. Not one we put on him, but like, oh, that was an unpleasant sensation. We had the opportunity to explain it to him. So now occasionally, once a month, once every month and a half, I can cut his toenails, but not his fingernails. Right? So maybe he has this autonomy to choose. Okay, getting dressed. All right, can we introduce autonomy into getting dressed? Where they get dressed. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example from my own life about how the where and when of dressing comes into play. In cold weather, neither of my children ever want to wear, winter clothes unless we're like going skiing or going sledding. So instead of infringing upon their autonomy, I give them autonomy not to put on their winter coat or, a hat or whatever, and I bring it with me. Okay. And then usually the where they get dressed is outside because they have the natural consequence of feeling the cold on their skin. And yes, it takes more effort and it's annoying for me, but I view this as an accommodation for a nervous system disability. It's fluctuating, but it disables them from accessing life, activities of daily living, and one or more basic needs. Okay, so when this is both an autonomy of where you get dressed and when you get dressed. And I have to facilitate this, but they got to choose, like, okay, I'm going to bring the winter stuff in a bag and you get to choose whether or not you get dressed in this cold weather clothing. So the where they do it has often been at the park, or when they do it is not in the moment I want them to. Okay, so the how, we talked about this with the lowering demands. Are we expecting them to get dressed by themselves, or do we do part of it? Are we giving them autonomy around the what of picking out their own outfit, wearing the same thing over and over again? For example, both my boys, my older son, when he was in burnout, for years only wore pajamas. And of course, was I worried that other kids were going to judge him? Yeah. But I knew that if I forced it, it could impact him going to school, right? So I was like, dude, if you want to wear your Minions pajamas every day, do it, And with my younger son now, even though it's winter, it's February now, he wears the same shorts and t-shirt every day. And yeah, he trails a fuzzy blanket around the house because it's drafty. But just this one thing, if I insisted, no, you have to wear pants because it's winter, just that loss of autonomy, I think would set us back a month in burnout. And that's just one example, right? And then the if, right? And I'm going to use this example of families we've worked with who have had, children or teens who have needed to go through a period of time not wearing clothes. And that's the ultimate autonomy, and it makes people uncomfortable. So we have to make cost-benefit decisions around who we allow in our home during this period of burnout. But I want to share that so that you don't feel shame and to normalize that, yes, this is an exertion of control and a need for autonomy around clothing. And, for some PDAers, this might be, I'm going to equalize or exert control around and be above this societal expectation that we have to wear clothes. And that's just what's happening. And they're trying to get back to nervous system safety. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with them. It's just what they're seeking for safety, autonomy, and being above because they don't feel equal to. Okay. Washing hands, autonomy. Thinking about when. Maybe you really want to facilitate washing after sneezing or peeing, but other times it's more negotiable and they get to decide. Again, how do we help them wash their hands? Maybe they have autonomy around how they do it. Can we bring them a bowl? Can they do it under the faucet? Maybe a puddle outside? These are smart kids. They're going to negotiate based on the principle of this puddle is water, so why can't I wash my hands here? And can we explore allowing autonomy around that? Then what? I myself have gotten caught up on it has to be like this. It has to be, you need to learn the skill of being, in the bathroom, at the faucet, turning it on, washing your hands. But maybe you use wet wipes. You let them do it with wet wipes. You bring a water bowl next to them. You have a paper towel. You have a cloth towel. You're using antibacterial soap that doesn't require water. It's all good. We're just doing the very best we can to help our neurodivergent children to access life. Okay, next accommodation, equality. Why is this important? And this also is a bit of a misnomer. Equality accommodations mean, in the most simplistic way, is letting your child or teen feel above you, more powerful, more authority, more of the decider role than you likely feel comfortable with. And here's the thing, if we don't do it mindfully and intentionally, it's still going to play out in them controlling, criticizing you, and seeking less adaptive ways to be above you. And this is where the power struggles happen. So if we can accommodate and preempt these around hygiene, we're deflating this like ticking time bomb that goes off around hygiene. So I'm just going to give you some quick examples. I'm not going to have an extensive list for each one. I'm just going to give you one or two examples for each of the categories, and then we'll go into novelty and nervous system safety, and I'll leave you with that to start experimenting and trying these ideas. Okay, equality, letting them feel above you. First, bathing and showering. So one pattern I've noticed is like when I run a bath with Epsom salts and a candle, and I've like got my book, and I maybe even bring my noise machine in and my frozen grapes and my Stanley cup for like my sensory experience to be away from all of the chaos of my kids. It is often when I've created this space for myself that one or both of my boys will swoop in and decide they want to replace me in the bath or preempt me in the bath, right? And I'm not doing it to get them in the bath. I'm doing it because I really want to take a bath and take care of myself and have some self-care. But this is an example of them like letting them feel above you because you're trying to decide, I'm going to take care of myself. And then they're like, no, I'm going to be above you and exert control. And like, it's annoying, but this is also a moment when I'm like, okay, it's bath time. They're doing it. We're getting out the Epsom salts. We're pouring the whole bag in. I'm going to have to go buy more because there's no more left. They're having their sensory experience and they're feeling above me. And it's worth it because it means they get clean. They have a good time. There's no resistance. An example with hair brushing, we could be letting them brush our hair for a while instead of focusing on us brushing their hair, letting them be above us, both physically, sit on the ground and they're behind you brushing your hair, but also, they're in control of how they're brushing. You can say things using declarative language that are self-deprecating or affirming for them that are related to hair brushing. Like, wow, your hair is so much longer and smoother than mine, period. And just see how they respond, right? So like, that's a way of introducing the topic of hair brushing without saying, hey, do you want to brush your hair or I'm going to brush your hair now? Hand washing, you can experiment with letting them wipe their hands on your clothing. You want them to wash it? You want them to wash their hands? Okay. Let them wash them on your clothes. I know that sounds weird, but like this is a way that like my younger son has washed his hands some, right? I'm like, okay, I'll get this part wet. You can just wipe on me. It's fine. And then I wash my clothes and I change them. Getting dressed, letting them control what you wear, letting them wear costumes. This is a way of being above societal expectations. A lot of PDA kids want to wear costumes to school. And we feel discomfort because it's not what's done. But like, nobody's getting hurt if your kid's dressing up as a dog to go to school, right? So can we explore allowing this being above societal expectations? So those are some quick examples of using the equality accommodation. Now let's talk about novelty, which is, I put it in the category of like, sensory intense experiences, novelty, and dopamine. So these are all things that can distract from that baseline of threat response and threat perception in the body, which is discomfort or pain for most of us who are PDA or have panic disorder like me. So novelty, let's just go through a bunch of examples for bathing and showering. So here's a non-comprehensive list of all the things that we've done to support our boys when they've had resistance around bathing. We've done remote control boats in a bath. We do a lot of foam soap, so different colored foam soaps that are like shaving cream, but they're actually soap and they can like write on the walls and like do huge piles of soap. We'll buy in bulk and they love it. Writing with bath crayons, putting food coloring in the bath, allowing them to eat a bowl of ice cream while they're in the bath. Lots of times with both my older son for a period of time, and now with my younger son, allowing them to have an iPad in the bath. So not in the bath, but I'll like set up a little chair and put the iPad there so my son can continue watching while I wash them, right? And it's been so interesting to watch my youngest son go through burnout, and now he's recovering, and I can see the indicators of how much he's activated and resistant around bathing. So now we're in a period where I still need to be using Novelty, like bath bombs, and I still need to give him autonomy around like, what time he's going to get in the bath. And sometimes I'll have to wait till the next day. But when we first started, there was a lot of resistance. He wouldn't wash his hair. There would be at least 2 weeks between taking baths, and we would always have to have the iPad in there with him. Now, there's not resistance. He's still only doing it once a week, but without meltdowns or resistance, and he's not needing the iPad. So is it perfect? Is he bathing every day like I would like him to? No, but we're making progress, and that's what we have to look for. We can listen to fun music or a podcast. We can put fun lighting in there. I like to do bath bombs. I would just get like a big box of like 40 bath bombs, each one different color, different scent, and then inside there would be these little plastic surprises. So it's like dopamine on dopamine on dopamine. And for my younger son, that really helped him in those early phases of burnout to like have that distraction and excitement of like novelty, dopamine, sensory intense experience of a new scent. And I think it distracted from all of that activation. We can do the same thing for hair washing. We can get creative about how we're washing the hair, different smells, different colors, different textures of our shampoos, of our soaps. We can play with, different hair dyes. Oh, that's funny because I forgot to write that one down. Both my sons would do these like spray dyes with different colors. So they dye their hair, and then they would get more used to having things in their hair, and it was related to them being able to hair wash. So getting dressed, experimenting with different socks or underwear that align with their special interest, whether it's Marvel characters or, Minecraft characters, letting them go against the grain of what they should be wearing, right? This can be novelty and autonomy and equality. So, if you can afford it, or maybe going, I used to go to secondhand stores and just like find all the coziest pajama bottoms I could possibly find. And then my son would have, like my older son who needed more novelty would have different ones for each day, right? And then finally, nervous system safety. So all of this comes back to wanting our children to feel subconsciously and in their body safe, so that they don't avoid and resist things and get into nervous system states like fight, flight, aggression, freeze, where they maybe selective mutism, or they're not connecting to the outside world, or shut down, which can look like, like chronic fatigue or lethargy, or just not being connected in the world, like hiding under a blanket for months, which happened with my younger son. So we want to add in nervous system safety from us or from another safe person if it's a sibling. So even when they're older, being near the bathroom, you don't have to be in it with them, but just being near, like your nervous system is close enough that they can ping to like your radio tower of safety, or allowing the iPad or the phone to come into the space of showering, bathing, going to the bathroom, right? That's a nervous system safety thing. If your kids are younger and they'll let you sitting on the ground while they're in the tub, even if you feel called to like fold laundry, maybe doing it in the bathroom next to them. I know it can get wet, it can be less effective and efficient, but like paying attention to them. Like a practice I have with my younger son is like when he's in the bathtub, I sit on the floor and I watch him, right? I watch what he's doing. I comment on his ideas. I'm using declarative language. I'm like, ooh, the bath bomb smells good. I like the milk flavor, right? I'm engaged. I'm there pinging to his little radio tower and he's pinging back to me. You know, a sibling can often be a safe nervous system that can facilitate bathing, for example. Both hair brushing and baths have been facilitated by Cooper because he was getting in the bath or he was brushing his hair. And then my youngest, even though he was in burnout, he saw his brother, who was a safe nervous system in that moment in time, not always, and then he was able to access it. So just to review, we want to focus on lowering demands, autonomy, equality, novelty, dopamine and sensory intense experiences, and not forgetting nervous system safety, which is your presence and undivided attention. All right, my friends, I hope that this supports your lovely children and teens to access more hygiene, and I also hope it makes you feel less stressed and less judged because, you know, there are many other families going through it, including my own, and we're all just doing the best we can. So happy experimenting, and I'd love to hear from you how things play out. All right, my friends, have a good day. Bye. Thanks, everyone, for being here with me at the At Peace Parents podcast. This is your source for all things related to understanding, supporting, accommodating, and advocating for your PDA child. To go deeper on any of these topics, check out my course offerings and masterclasses at the website www.atpeaceparents.com. To completely transform the way you think about and relate to your child and to bring peace and stability to your home, join us for the next cohort of the Paradigm Shift program.